Welcome to Master of Science with host Professor James McCanney. The good professor's career spans 50 years as a university teacher, scientist, and engineer. Each week, he will explore the rapidly changing world of science as many long-held theories are crumbling under the weight of new data. He will cover the fields of geology, archaeology, meteorology, oceanography, space science, astronomy, cosmology, biological evolution, virology, energy, mathematics, and more. So please welcome the host of Master of Science, James McCanney.
Good evening, everybody. This is episode number 52, moving right along. And tonight's main science topic, I'm going to continue talking about Comet 3I Atlas. Its official designation is C 2025 N1 Atlas. It was discovered July 1st or 2nd, depending on what time zone you're in, of this year, and a very fast-moving object, a fairly large object as things go in outer space. And the people believe that it's a comet, but it's really not developing a comet coma. And all of a sudden, there's a lot of mysterious hiding of data. We know that they have the big telescopes, the big facilities, the radio telescopes are all trained on this object. But none of that data is coming through to the public. All of this little gee whiz, YouTube videos repeating the same thing over and over again, how amazing it is and how special. There's a little bit of controversy between professional astronomers. I'll go into that. But I'm going to give you, since last week's show, which you should watch, it was done in two parts because of technical issues, but parts 1 and 2, you should watch that. But this show will build on last week's show with the discussion of this comet. But first, I have some announcements to make, just some general things in the news. The Canadian wildfires out of control. Now, this is going on year after year. This is getting to be kind of a common thing here. And my advice is that the president, or somebody in charge, it would be him, I imagine, should take our airplanes and retrofit them with water tanks. So these would be bomber-type airplanes, and send them up to Canada and put out these fires, and then send the bill to the Canadian government. It's like they're dumping all this vast amount of pollution across the border. They can't control, they can't manage it. It's like every time, I hate to say this, I'm not a political person and I don't want to even go there, but every time liberal people get in charge of something, it just goes to crap. They can't manage things. It's, like things like fires. Take Los Angeles, for example. Take downtown Minneapolis or other cities that burn to the ground, the northwest cities in the U.S. They don't know how to manage stuff, simple stuff. And so anyway, these fires are burning out of control, but just look at these numbers. They are, this year, 4%. Now imagine Canada is the, second largest country surface-wise in the world? Or is it third behind China? Russia is first. Literally all of Canada is forested. And it's a vast amount of forest. 4% of that will burn this year. 4% of it, and about 4% burned 2 years ago, 2023. We had similar fire situation. That's 8% of the vast area of Canada burned to the ground, burned to a crisp, because they can't manage this. And I'm going to show a graph here. Now look at this. This is the going back for decades and decades, the fire count, the number of fires, the number of the little line down at the bottom is the number of fires greater than 200 acres. In other words, if it gets to be more than 200 acres, and that has doubled this year. But anyway, what happens, let me explain the problem here. And it happens in California, not to mention a place run by liberals. The pine trees especially, the end result is this micron or multiple micron, a couple microns in diameter, dust particles. And it hangs low to the ground. In other words, maybe the first 100 feet or something above the ground. And then it moves, of course, with the wind and is horrifically bad for the lungs. So, micron-sized particles in the air. And they go into your lungs. They go into your eyes, too. They can clog up your eyes. But what happens is they go into your lungs and they irritate your lungs, and then those that get into your bloodstream, they go directly into your bloodstream. So you have these little smoke particles moving around in your bloodstream. It's really bad. It's bad stuff, and Canada is sending voluminous amounts of this over the border. It's going all the way down into the southern states. And the Canadian border is just unlivable. The people are living there, and it's a health problem, a serious health problem. And it's very bad for children, and it's very bad for the elderly. And I mean, what do you say? So Canada cannot manage their forests. And so, like I say, they should send our airplanes up to the border and put out these fires, send our own people, if nothing else, the National Guard or something, put out these fires, and then send the bill to Canada. Okay, this is craziness. China just put up a 20 megawatt, the largest, claimed largest, three-blade wind turbine on the planet, and they claim that it'll provide electricity for 96,000 houses. The actual numbers, when you run them on these bigger three-blade wind turbines, and by the way, I have shows where I talk about the wing generator and my invention that is much more efficient. But the three-blade wind turbines, they simply don't work. So when they make these claims, and it just drives me crazy, they say, oh, this is enough electricity for 96,000 homes. No, divide that by 10. So maybe 10,000 homes could receive power from this device. And it's maybe 96,000 homes in a third world country like in Africa. So that's the lie they come out of the gate with. And the bigger these things get, the more inefficient they become. Because those big blades move very slowly. They talk about this covering the area of something like 6 soccer fields. Yeah, but these 3 blades are not covering 6 soccer fields. They're covering the area of about maybe a third of 1 soccer field. And as they spin very slowly, the wind simply is blowing through them. So they're terribly inefficient, and the scam continues, the 3-blade wind generator scam. Here's just a quick note on NASA. They're taking early retirement there. They have an early retirement program, or opt-out program, and allegedly about 4,000 employees have taken this. NASA employs an estimated between 17 and 18,000 employees. So this is about 20% of the workforce that is opting out. And my advice is that they should completely shut NASA down completely, including all of the science facilities. Not because it's bad science, in a sense, the things that they're doing. They're very much misusing the taxpayer money. NASA should have been building a highway to the especially low Earth orbit. So companies, people, even vacationers, tourists could go to low Earth orbit. And they didn't. What do? They build a 20-year plan to send 3 guys to Mars. It's absolutely, okay, well that's great, but what does that do for you, the public? Nothing. And you're paying for this. They're shutting down some of the big telescopes. which they should, not because the facilities are bad, but because the science that comes out of there is garbage. And so anyway, then tonight's talk on this comet is a good example. The garbage science that's coming out of NASA is just horrific. They have to shut these facilities down and then ramp them back up with new staff. That's all I can tell you. So anyway, I want to jump right into this topic because it's very popular. It's gotten a lot of attention. It's the third interstellar interloper that we have discovered. There were two other ones previously that, in the way you know these, is they come in so fast that they're from someplace else. But I want to qualify that first of all. That's because scientists do not understand. They think that these objects, like comets, come from something called the Oort cloud. And I call it the McCanny effect. And what's going on is when objects typically come in from far beyond the reaches of the solar system, from interstellar space, intergalactic space potentially, what happens is that the first thing they do is they discharge the solar capacitor, and they take on a shot of material, and it's called the tail drag in my scientific work. The tail drag is what causes the comet nucleus to slow down. So that gives you the effect. And when Oort, Scandinavian guy back in I think it was the 1800s, they first started looking at comet orbits, and they said they're all coming from this region in outer space. They're not infinitely far away, but they're coming from they're closed orbits, basically, closed parabolic orbits. And they seem to be coming from their far end of their orbit is kind of in this region of outer space, all around the solar system. So they said, oh, it must be a cloud of these things out there. And that's a good assumption, first out of the gate assumption. But what they didn't understand is these things are not dirty snowballs. Comets are the discharge of the solar capacitor. And so what happens when they first come into the solar system, get inside the solar capacitor, they discharge the solar capacitor, they take on mass and they slow down, and that gives them the impression that they're coming from this certain region in outer space. So that's why I call it the McCanny effect, not the Oort cloud. Okay, so here's what's happened in the last week, since my show last week. People have noticed small idiosyncrasies of the orbit, and one of them is that the comet's closest approach to the sun, it just happens to be when it's diametrically opposed on the opposite side of the sun of where Earth will be at that given time. And so people are going, ooh, there's some woo-woo stuff going on. That's planned alien activity. They're hiding something. And I'm going to throw in my own little quip here in a minute, so stay tuned. But I don't see that as particularly unusual. And it's just something from outer space. But is it an alien intelligent device? I mean, you can ask the question. But I'm a scientist. Where is the scientific proof based on observation that this is some kind of alien constructed, technology? Or and it's pretty big. It's like 20 kilometers across, they say. And like last week, I gave the detailed description of how they come to that conclusion, that it is potentially very wrong, that this object is very much larger than 20 kilometers across, because of the way they use albedo to convert into the size of the object based on its distance, location, the reflectivity of the object, and the amount of light coming back to telescopes, etc. So the idea that it's going to be on the opposite side of the Earth when it's at closest approach to the sun is I'm not impressed with that. I'm more impressed with the fact that this object will have a perfect I mean, this is some object moving absolutely this fast. It has a perfect alignment with Mars, Mercury, and the Sun on the 2nd of October. And I showed that last week, and so here again is the alignment, just absolutely so perfect. That to me is unusual. The idea that it's on the far side of the Sun, the closest approach to the Sun, lots of comets do that. We have that happen all the time, so not a big deal. But to be this perfectly aligned with Mars, now, what you would think, well, why is it, there seems to be like a little bit of a tour of the solar system going on here. And the closest approach is to Mars, and then later in March of next year, of 2026, it will make a close approach to Jupiter. But this approach to Mars is very interesting because a number of reasons. One of the specialties I have, and I worked with around military groups in this field, this particular field, is electromagnetic propulsion systems. And so I've talked about this before. If you were an alien race and you were going to come into a solar system, you would come in at very high velocity, of course, and you would want a braking mechanism. And so one of the non-inertial propulsion systems, electromagnetic propulsion systems, that I designed would use an electrical discharge in the solar system to brake. So it'd be the electrical discharge creating a magnetic field, and you would use that magnetic field to brake the spacecraft for braking, not break it in pieces, but break it in terms of slowing down. And so, but then you have to ask the question, well, why on the Earth would they go to Mars? Why wouldn't they go to Earth? Because that's where the people live. And the reality is that only a few thousand years ago, Mars was a blue planet. And it actually, according to legend, and now I'm just repeating legend, these are things that I've learned through my career, and there's very good evidence for this. But we know that Mars was a blue planet, and it had a human population a number of thousands of years ago. And Venus, the comet, came by and ripped off its atmosphere and oceans, and that's what my logo, in fact, refers to events like this. And I'll be talking a little bit more about the logo, some of the little more detail of my logo. But why would they go to Mars? And the reason is because Mars was the kind of the capital of the human population before Venus, the comet, came through. Devastated Mars, devastated Earth on 2 different occasions. We know that from the Mayan Popol Vuh and other sources from around the historical world, from the ancient world, we know that. Moses saw the pillar of fire reaching up into the sky. That was the electrical discharge from the comet Venus down to the surface of the Earth. They were in northern Africa at the time, and there's other scarring and tremendous explosions that occurred at that time in northern Africa. Some of these sites are just completely destroyed, just blown to pieces, where you have huge columns literally blown apart and scattered all over the place, something that you couldn't do even with modern machinery. If somebody said, take one of these sites and trash it and throw these pieces of these big pillars and columns and scattered them all over the place, you couldn't do it. So these were the result of huge explosions, and I talked about this last week. The Tunguska explosion was the result of an electrical discharge from a passing comet, and it caused a nuclear explosion at the surface of the Earth at the site of Tunguska. Okay, so we know that comets have created electrical discharges to planet Earth. That's the point I'm making. The Tunguska event is one, and when the Russian scientists that I worked with, they were from the University of Novosibirsk, they were the scientists that went on site at Tunguska, and they found no residue from any kind of bolide coming in and exploding. And it would have peppered the ground with residual material, and it did not. So there was no bolide of any kind, and it was an electromagnetic event. That's something that they were looking for, and they had witnessed all kinds of other electromagnetic events in the atmosphere, including tornadoes on the sun, and they were looking at all of this, and they knew there was electromagnetism involved in these, but they didn't know the source of energy for these, and that's where my work came in. It was the theoretical work that explained everything they were looking at. So once again, the process at Tunguska was this small comet came by Earth, and they could see the locals could see the sky brightening night after night until the night of the explosion, which was heard hundreds of miles away, literally thousands of miles away. It was a nuclear explosion that was dozens of times bigger than the bomb at Hiroshima. And it was a hydrogen explosion, but they didn't know what caused the electrical discharge. So my work explained that when the comet came by, it had a high negative charge, and so when we got inside of its Debye shielding, which is the spherical shell of charge that surrounds the comet nucleus to isolate it physically in a plasma sense, isolate it from everything else, then that's when the electrical discharge would occur. Like I said, Moses saw this. We see the Eye of the Sahara, another electrical discharge that turned basically the desert into glass. And you see that ringed effect. It's an experiment you can actually do in elementary physics class. You take an electrical current, a DC current, and you run a wire through a little hole in a piece of paper, and you put some iron sprinklings on the piece of paper. You run a current through the wire, and you get these ring patterns. I talk about that in some of my early papers, discussing these rings that you find on Callisto. So we see these electrical discharge signatures on other moons, on other planets, etc. And so that's what was going on there. But the point here is that when this comet comes by Mars, it's going to have a similar discharge. And if it were an alien craft, that is when you would probably send out a probe of some kind to use that electrical discharge to slow down. But the question is, you come back to the question, well, why would they do this at Mars? There's nothing there. It's a red hulk of a planet. There's hardly any atmosphere. There's certainly no people living there. And the answer is very simple, because the last time any aliens were here, at least from this group, if this was what it was, and this is my kind of my throwing my hat in the ring, if you want to get, I'm being about 1% serious when I give the following topic, that the last time these aliens may have been here, there was a high population on Mars, and that was the capital. Literally, the capital of the human race was on Mars. Now, do you remember, most of you don't remember, when I was a kid, back in the 50s, there was the movies, which were reruns at the time, of a guy named Flash Gordon. And the interplay here was that Flash Gordon was this hardworking space guy, and he would fly to Mars in a spaceship with his little crew of people, and they had these adventures. But person central to this character entourage was Ming the Merciless. And he lived on Mars. And he had these death rays, which is, of course, reminiscent of Tesla. And they would point the death ray at Earth to destroy Earth. And, of course, Flash Gordon would go save the day. But the point of this is not to recount a Hollywood movie from the 1930s. I don't even know when the Flash Gordon movies were made. But the idea is that they were based on the tradition that that Mars had been populated, and that the bankers had when they knew that Venus the comet was coming, it was going to destroy the planet Mars, they left. They literally left, and they landed on Earth in the region which we now call the Black Forest, and Liechtenstein, in those regions of Central Europe. And that's where the Rothschild banking enterprise grew out of. And of course, they got a lot of funding during basically the raping and pillage of the Americas by the Spanish and the English primarily, but the Dutch and other, the Italians, the Portuguese, primarily English and Spanish, raping and pillaging of of Central and South America and Mexico. The gold, vast amounts of gold that were brought back, and that's money funneled through all of those governments, which were controlled by the Vatican. And the international banking community that came out of that was what we see today. The Rothschild banking community, which runs the Bank of England, the Federal Reserve in the United States, and other banks around the world, like I always talk about the CIA being the police force of the World Bank. The CIA has nothing to do with the United States. Most people don't understand that. But at any rate, okay, so this is getting a little complicated and off the topic of Comet 3I Atlas. But that would be a reason that I would give for why they're going with this probe near to Mars, if in fact it is. And I'd give it about maybe a couple % chance of being an alien craft. But, there's some very peculiar things. This alignment of this craft with Mars and Mercury is so exact. It's not that the object is going to be opposite side of the sun during closest approach from planet Earth. No, to me, that's not a big deal at all. And that's what some professional astronomers are proposing. And that's why I'm mentioning it, not that I am proposing it. Professional astronomers are proposing some of these what they consider unusual aspects to the orbit of this object. What I consider unusual is very different, including the fact that, as I talked about last week, when this comet starts arriving at Jupiter in March of 2026, it's going to turn into a sulfur dioxide comet, almost guaranteed. And it should be a nice water comet, with water being the primary tail material up to that point. But when it starts aligning with Jupiter, and that starts really about late April, March 1st of 2026, all of a sudden it's going to go boom and change into a sulfur dioxide comet, and that's because the region around Jupiter is a high concentration of sulfur dioxide. That's why Jupiter's red. You see the sulfur dioxide in the atmosphere of Jupiter. You see the little close-up moon to Jupiter. Io is a very high surface content of sulfur dioxide, and that's because it used to be a comet and was captured by Jupiter as a moon, and was captured by the other three big moons out there. And so Io is a brand new moon, and the nucleus of a comet. That's what comet nuclei look like when they're new. And so anyway, I'm not going to get too far offline here. I want to get back and talk about Comet 3I Atlas. So my belief is that it does have some very strange properties. It's very large, and coming in from interstellar space. Why would it go next to Mars? I've already given you a talk about that. But let me give you another example. Let's look at today. If some dignitary were come from outer space today and visit, typically they would go to, say, Washington, D.C. And you'd think, well, the Earth is a big place. Why wouldn't they visit the central United States, the 48 states, Kansas? Or why wouldn't they visit the biggest state, Alaska? Or maybe Texas, the second biggest state? Why would they visit this little area called Washington, D.C.? Well, that's where the power is. That's where the power brokers are. That's where the power people are. the leaders, so to speak. And so it's similar to that. If you look back a number of thousands of years ago, Mars was the center of power of the two-planet system, Earth and Mars. And they were in very different orbits at that time. Earth, in fact, our moon was in a very different orbit at that time. But the Mars was in a very, very different orbit. And when Venus came by, it really torqued it over, let's put it that way, and caused Mars to have a very different orbit. It used to come much closer to Earth on every number of years, making travel between Mars and Earth very much more, much easier. Okay, so let me talk a little bit about the nuclear explosion process. I went into detail last week, and I'm going to give some more detail this week. And so will that happen on planet Mars? So once again, let's start out by taking a look at my logo. And so people look at this logo, and it's like a pretty logo. It's very nicely done. But there's some details here. This is not just a pretty picture or something that some artist, graphic artist, dreamt up to make look interesting. I designed this myself, and I had a graphic artist create what I told them to create. And so the detail between the comet and the planet there, that's the comet has an electrical discharge that's reaching out to this planet, and it's a blue planet, so that would be similar to Mars or Earth. And you see at the end, there's the jaws of the snake-like discharge, and that's why they talk about the snake, the plumed serpent god, or the Quetzalcoatl, because in outer space it looks like a snake. Okay, so now look at this discharge. Okay, you have the comet, you have the electrical discharge from the sun out to the comet. That's the electron beam. That's the sunward spike. That would be the tongue of Quetzalcoatl, or the tongue of the dragon for the Chinese. Okay, you remember they always have a big tongue. That's very important, and that's what it is. It's the electrical discharge. And this comet, by the way, exhibited a sunward spike early on in its entry into the solar system, indicating a very significant electrical discharge from the sun. Okay, but now look once again at the logo, and right where the discharge meets the planet, there's a very bright, intentionally bright spot. Now what's going on at that bright spot? Well, that's where the nuclear explosion would be, if there were enough water in the atmosphere, enough hydrogen to for the explosion to take place. Mars does not have that significant amount of water in the atmosphere to split, but it potentially, if the electrical discharge hit where there was water ice, which apparently there's a lot of on Mars, it could dissociate the water into hydrogen, oxygen, and there you have available hydrogen to cause the nuclear explosion. Okay, so the other thing is, remember the Moses event, where Moses and the Israelites, they're seeing the pillar up in, it's like a tornadic pillar reaching up into the heavens, and that's going up to the comet. Why is it a tornado? Because it's ionizing the air at the ground. That air then is ionized, it's moving up the electric field, and when it does, the Coriolis force causes it to spin. So it's like when you pull the plug on the drain of the bathroom tub, you pull the drain, the water goes down, and it swirls, and it goes down. Well, this is going up. It's the same process, but it's swirling going up. So at any rate, and there's a very good rendition of this. If you look at the 1950s movie, The Ten Commandments, with Charlton Heston, there's a scene in there where they're getting away from the Egyptian, and Pharaoh and his armies are coming. And there's the pillar of fire. And Hollywood does a great job, a super Hollywood job for 1950s, the special effects, exactly what it would have looked like to Moses. And like I say, you have these vast huge stone cities were completely blown to smithereens by something. And they were active cities in the days of Moses. So anyway, we see the evidence of this all over the place. But on the logo, once again, you see the explosion. And so what are the things that happen there? The pillar of fire reaching up into the sky, the potential for hydrogen nuclear explosions, and then burning, literally burning the ground there, potentially causing craters or scar marks, burned scar marks in the ground, and other effects like the eye of the Sahara is one such effect, where you have these ringed, basically melted glass. Once again, when they were at Tunguska, the scientists, they recognized all of the symptoms of an electrical discharge. And right at the center where this thing discharged was a little lake, little round lake, still there. And so that would have provided the water, which would be dissociated into hydrogen, which would cause the explosion. And the explosion was at ground zero. It wasn't some bolide exploding up high in the air. That it was at ground zero. And the trees right next to the lake, this is a lake maybe, quarter mile across max. The trees right next to that were burned to all of the leaves burned off. The trunk was not burned, but all the leaves and branches were burned off these trees, and they were all in an outward lying pattern. And so indicative of an explosion at ground zero. And that's the cause of it. And like I say, that's why the Russians liked my work, my theoretical work, because it explained this. Where did the electrical discharge come from? It did not come from a passing cloud or thunderstorm. Passing thunderstorms do not have that much energy. But we're talking about an electrical discharge that came from outer space. Okay. Now, let's dive a little bit deeper into this. NASA has equipment that can detect this, see this. We have telescopes. We have the Hubble Space Telescope, the James Webb, that are fully capable of observing this in high detail. And I guarantee you they have these instruments trained on this object. And all of a sudden there's just a lack of any mention of this. Just this little flurry of BS between a couple of professional astronomers. One saying it's an alien object, the other one's poo-pooing that. But as far as real data coming from James Webb or the Hubble or from Mauna Kea, the Hawaiian observatories, or the Haleakala military observatories, or other ones around the Chile observatories, not a peep. It's just quiet as a mouse, and that makes you wonder all the more. If there was just, this is just a comet, there'd be a lot of information on it. But it's definitely quiet, as they say, the old expression. The silence is deafening. The silence is deafening. And so NASA is obviously early on in this comet's history, or this, I will call it a comet, because that's its official designation, but we don't know. And they're quiet as a church mouse. There's no data coming out, so that ought to tell you something right there. Now, one of the other effects that we know historically happened, and this in fact was at Mars, and we know it happened at Earth when Venus the Comet came by, it relieved Mars of its atmosphere and oceans. And why did that happen? Because the nucleus of the comet, Venus, Quetzalcoatl, the plumed serpent god of the night sky, according to the Aztecs, the Mayas, and the Incas, and like I say, the Chinese dragon, the phoenix, Mars was a blue planet, according to historical records. But why would it relieve the atmosphere of Mars and not do that to Earth, is the question. And so there's actually a scientific answer. Venus the nucleus of the comet Venus, as it passed by Mars, was gravitationally, the surface gravity of the nucleus of Venus the comet was larger, was greater than the surface gravity of Mars. And so literally it was a tug of war. Once the electrical connection was made, it was a tug of war between the gravitational field of Mars and Venus, the nucleus of Venus the comet. And so Venus the comet won, and basically pulled the atmosphere and oceans off of Mars. And this is the ancients saw this. They reported that in a single night, Mars lost its atmosphere and oceans. When that same comet Venus came by Earth, Earth was bigger than this Venus in terms of mass. So the surface gravity of Earth was larger than that of Venus. So Earth won the pollution event, if you want to call it that, and the ancients talk about that. Moses talks about it, the red hand of death up in the atmosphere. That's what they're talking about. They're talking about the hydrocarbons and potentially sulfur dioxide coming into the upper atmosphere as Venus came by. And all of the plagues of Egypt were a result of Venus the comet coming by. The vermin coming up out of the ground. I've talked about this before. When we were kids and we wanted to go fishing, we'd take the battery out of the car, we'd hook up a couple of wires and stick those wires down into the ground from the car battery, and within 10 minutes, all the worms you would ever want to go fishing with came out of the ground, because something about the electricity would drive them out of the ground. And so that's what happened during the Moses event. The plagues of prior to leading up to Moses leaving with the Israelites. And yes, they were Israelites, blonde-haired, blue-eyed race that were craftsmen. They were not slaves, they were craftsmen in Egypt, but very essential to the Egyptian economy. Because they were the ones that did things. They were the ones that created the engineering and the. But anyway, there again, I'm getting sidetracked. But we know about what happened because the vermin that came up out of the grounds, the frogs, the insects, etc. Excuse me. And so Earth won the battle in that case, because Earth had a larger surface gravity than the bypassing nucleus of the comet Venus. And that's the size ratio we see today, very well known. But that explains why Earth did not lose its atmosphere and oceans, but on previous occasions, Earth did lose its atmosphere and oceans, and had the atmosphere, in many cases, the atmosphere very drastically altered. And so this idea that for example, the dinosaurs, there's this myth that the dinosaurs died because of an asteroid hitting Earth. No, it's because of a large passing comet. And that was the cause of the iridium later that's around the Earth, etc., which there are other records of that relative to, say, the mastodons, which was a number of thousands of years ago, probably within the last 5,000 years, the end of the Holocene period, not 12,000 years ago. Like there's some, excuse me, but some yo-yos running around the internet trying to make that case, and it's just not true. Okay, now I'm going to expand on this idea of the hydrogen explosions. Where does this come from? And there again, in my work, go back to my very early work when I was at Cornell, I realized that the fusion of the sun is not in its core. There were contradictions. When I was there, I'd go up to the office of a guy named Hans Bethe. He was a Nobel Prize winner and won his Nobel Prize for giving understanding to the nuclear chain reactions that go into fission, fusion, etc. And so anyway, I had mentioned that there was problems with the core fusion model, and he was very supportive of me and helped me directed me to the European journals where my papers started to be published when I was there. But anyway, I discussed the issue of the fusion in the sun and that it had to be up in the atmosphere, which is a radical change. Now, this is, once again, very high-level physics to make this transition between the core fusion model and the model where the fusion is in the sun. Well, the other question is, where does the continual ongoing supply of hydrogen then come from up in the atmosphere? And it turns out that the sun is a comet discharging the solar capacitor, and they just discovered that. The Voyager spacecraft just discovered exactly that. The discharge that's just outside of our solar system, and the Russian scientists also talked about that. They were very adamant that the supply of the hydrogen for the sun came from the local galactic environment and was constantly being brought into the sun. And so the idea that the sun would burn 4.5 billion years on a supply of fusionable material in the core is just simply wrong. And you can tell that because, many reasons. One is very simple. The original idea of the core fusion model was that the solar surface should be smooth like a basketball, this orange color that we see. But you start looking at the surface of the sun, and it's tumultuous. It has flares. It has solar wind coming off of it. All of these electromagnetic effects that the core fusion model doesn't explain, doesn't even begin to explain it. And then you do a little simple mass conversion. You take E equals mc squared. You take the light, the solar constant, the amount of light leaving the sun on a continual basis, and you calculate the conversion of mass to create that light coming off the sun and all of the electromagnetic spectrum from microwaves up to ultraviolet and X-rays. And what do you get? You don't have enough matter in the core of the sun to burn for 4.5 billion years. It simply doesn't work. But don't tell that to NASA or any of the standard scientists. They don't want facts. They want to keep pounding their little nursery rhyme, the little nursery rhyme that fusion is in the core of the sun. So now the reality is, and by the way, the Russians performed a very interesting, simple experiment. And this, once again, the reason they liked my work is because it explained how this happened. It's the electrical discharges in the solar atmosphere created by it's basically a fusion fire, the separation of charge, and the discharges within the solar atmosphere are what kick off the fusion reactions in the solar atmosphere. So it's the same process that happens when water is dissociated on planet Earth by an electrical discharge. But like I say, the electrical discharges from an average or even big thunderstorm are not enough to kick off fusion. They do something that's very interesting. It's called ball lightning. Ball lightning is a very low cool form of fusion. And it's basically a superatom state that hydrogen goes into, where the self-induced magnetic field holds the electrons orbiting the proton nucleus, and the protons are held together, once again, by magnetic fields. And that's what ball lightning is. It's a result of lightning in Earth's atmosphere, but it's not enough to kick off a fusion explosion, which is another energy level above that. So anyway, when I talk about the comet discharging to the Earth's atmosphere and causing a nuclear explosion, it's relative to the same process that goes on in the sun. And if you look at my work, my original published papers on these topics, that's what I say. Okay, so now we're getting back to Comet 3I, Atlas, coming by Mars, close enough to where it's going to have a significant electrical discharge to the planet Mars. And once again, Mars does not have hydrogen in its atmosphere in great quantities, but it does have hydrogen locked in water that's on the surface. So if the discharge hits where the ice is, potentially it could dissociate the oxygen and hydrogen from the water. And now you have free hydrogen that could create a nuclear explosion. And this would be observable from Earth using our observatories here, the Webb telescope, the Hubble Space Telescope, the big major telescopes, radio telescopes would be able to observe it. And the radio signals coming off of these massive electrical discharges, and the Mars rovers, these little rover things that are going there. And believe me, there are much bigger robotic devices on Mars that you don't know about, because they're secret scientific, tier 1 scientific programs. You think those stupid little rovers, and I shouldn't say stupid, they're a lot of good sciences come from those rovers. But do you think those are the biggest ones that are on Mars? No, not at all. They have much bigger, much better ones that are exploring the archaeology on planet Mars, because the people who really run the scientific show are controlled by the world bankers, and they're very interested in the conditions on Mars because their ancestors had to leave Mars and come to planet Earth, because that's where they were based prior to the Venus event. And so they know all of this. They know, they don't really understand the science part of it, but they know the history of their ancestors having to leave, coming to the like I say, they landed in regions of Central Europe, what is now Romania, Transylvania, Liechtenstein, those small countries of Europe. Excuse me. And that's where they connected up with the Vatican to form what we now have as the world banking system. So this is not something new, that if you look up the Rothschild banking empire, it talks about them beginning in the 1500s. Well, no, that's just when they got the shot in the arm from all of the gold that came back from the New World, and gave them, because the world economic system was based on gold, has been for a long time, but that was like discovering an asteroid full of gold. All of these ships coming back from the New World, ballasted with gold, literally. Unbelievable. Hundreds and hundreds of 200-foot ships ballasted with gold, going back to Spain, England, the Netherlands, and all ending up in the Vatican. Yeah. And that's the basis. So that's why it looks like the Rothschild banking empire began in the 1500s, but that's where the record keeping that they released to the public began. But they were around for literally thousands of years prior to that, using the same techniques as they use today to control the public. Very interesting. So a lot is coming out because of this Comet 3I Atlas, a lot of information. But there again, I don't know if it's, I'm not making a claim whether it's alien or not. You can see that there's some very unusual things going on here, but unusual things happen all the time in outer space. So I'm not going to give it a probability. If it's alien, then it is. If it's not, it's not. And there's no, let me put it this way, there's no scientific, real hardcore scientific evidence that it is alien technology. There's no hardcore evidence, but NASA by now probably has that data, but they're not going to let it out to you, the public. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to do these screenshots of the entire path of this object, 3I Atlas, and all the significant dates. And I just want to remind you, here's somewhat the sequence. The object was discovered July 2nd of this year, coming into the solar system. It's going to have an interaction with Mars in October 2nd, in that time frame. Then it's going to have an interaction with Venus early November. Then it'll have a interaction with By the way, that Mars interaction includes Mercury, a very exact alignment, and all of the different things I talked about could potentially happen. And remember, in outer space, the conditions of the sun, there's other factors involved here. So these are based on trigger mechanisms that are predictable, but there are other factors. If the sun is not real active at the time, if the solar wind is not real active, then those could be potential factors. But then into March of next year, it'll have this interaction with Jupiter, potentially the comet turning into a sulfur dioxide comet. So here we will just run these slides. Just take a look at them. You can stop the video at any point and look at these slides in detail. But looking at these alignments, it's very, very interesting. Let's just put it that way. Okay, there you go. So very interesting, and I'll keep you posted as time develops, as these next months into next March, as these things develop. But very clearly, NASA is hiding data big time, and the lid is shut down. They're not releasing anything. All you see is these little nobodies running around YouTube trying to make it sound, they're just repeating the same story over and over again, but nothing from NASA. Something's going on. So at any rate, I just want to remind you, go to the webpage right up here. This jmccsci.com is the main webpage. From there, you can get to the water filter page, and very good pricing on whole house water filters, gravity water filter elements, sink filters, etc. So you check that out. The JMCC water filters, my water filter company of over 25 years. And so check it out. Once again, jmccsci.com. We'll talk to you next week.
This has been Master of Science with host James McCanny. Join us each week as James will delve into historical figures such as Nikola Tesla, Albert Einstein, and the great mathematicians as we explore the history of man, Earth, and our universe as you've never seen it before. Tuesdays, 7 p.m. Eastern,